So she, at 22 years old, when, women's basketball was not the most popular thing, the program was not well resourced necessarily. And she takes over that team and over her, multi-decade career, grows it into they become the dominant team in women's college hoops. Like, and then they have these major rivalries with Connecticut, with they're just like Tennessee becomes synonymous with Pat Summitt, like the orange. I mean, and that goes both ways. So there is a statue of Pat Summitt in Knoxville. She is so integral to that program. And she loved the university. She spent her entire career there. She clearly could have done some other things. She spends her entire career there. She's so integral just to the fabric of the university. 8 championships, back to back in 3 years, back to back, innumerable Final Four appearances, 1,098 wins, most of any coach, male or female, at the time that she was playing. And she sends 39 players to the WNBA. Like, her record is just, it's kind of like an unbelievable feat, the record that she attained in the short time that she was there. You just, it's kind of funny. I kind of joke, but I'm not joking, that when we went through the archive, when we talked to people, I was like, everybody really loves her. Dawn Staley says it. She's like, everybody loved her. And so I was like, I'm going to try and find some people who don't love Pat. And I couldn't find any. Like no, at least no one publicly is going to say anything. And I think that's because she just went about her business. She wasn't looking for fights, or she's competitive, but she just was like, I'm about me and my team. And we're going to focus on us and how good we can be.
So what drew you to the project? And then can you just talk about the creative process and putting this all together?
Yeah. I've, in the last 5 years or so, I've been doing more and more sports related projects, particularly women in sports. So I had done a series about Title IX, which is actually a civil rights law, but it has been used to gain more equality in for women in sports. I had done a film for Amazon called Power of the Dream, about how the WNBA helped get Raphael Warnock elected, flipped the Senate. So I've just really gotten this appreciation for these stories. They have everything you need for a great film. There's drama, there's competition, there's heart, there's effort, there's disappointment. So when, ABC Hulu came to me and Robin Roberts, I've also always wanted to work with Robin. I just feel like she's one of those people who've had such an interesting career, starting as a sports reporter. And it's very few people who make that leap to be, she's the anchor of the most important morning show. So I just have a lot of respect for Robin. We have some things in common health-wise too. And she has, just really helped me. So like this whole thing, like, and then to tell you the truth, like, I did not go to an SEC school. I was not like a big basketball follower. So the opportunity to learn about Pat was really intriguing to me. And it just kind of exceeded my dreams. It actually reminded me of the process. I made the film Luther, Never Too Much. And it reminded me of that because we had so much archive. The university helped us. Her family gave us their home videotapes. Sally Jenkins, the amazing, reporter who wrote, so beautifully about Pat, she gave us her audio interviews with Pat. So we could really, I had a lot to work with. And so we could really use that to kind of let Pat tell her story in a way that to me is like really a satisfying film experience. It's not only people saying how great she was. It's really her talking about her fears, her, insecurities, like all of us. And yet she did all these great things. But then, it's like that magazine feature, they're just like us, celebrities. They're afraid, they're worried. But she really did accomplish so much. So it was just a very, very satisfying and for the most part, very joyful project to work on.
How did you balance telling the story of Pat Summitt in terms of her as the coach versus her as the person? Because there's so much information out there. How did you try to like put it all in a concise documentary where this could probably be a mini series? I mean,
Oh, easy, easy. I
so
mean,
how did she kind of like, have that painstaking process of cutting probably a
yeah,
lot of great information? How did that go?
it's the hardest thing to do with someone like Pat, who does have such a big giant legacy, to try and fit it into this is, really tight, like 86 minutes, I think, which is tight. I really wanted to focus on the person. I really am interested in my work on what people don't know. So people who know about Pat, they know about 8 championships. They know about, 1098 wins. They might know, but like a lot of people don't know that she sent 39 players to the WNBA. I mean, like there's her record is for people who follow is pretty well known. I think what's not known is the other side of Pat. And so the archive that we had, the interview tapes we had, you see a different side of the coach. You see the person who's insecure, the person who has to fight. There were no scholarships for female athletes when Pat was going to college. So she came of age at a time where she had to make her own way. And that I think explains to you why she's such a great coach. She's training her players to fight through adversity and to not give up. And that to me that helps you understand her more, but it also helps you appreciate her more. No one gave Coach Summitt anything. She went out and fought for it in such a graceful way. And so I was really attracted to that story.
I noticed, and something I didn't know, is her connections to USA basketball. What was that like telling the story of her as a player and then as a coach? Because, I think for at least my generation as a millennial, USA basketball, when it comes to their women's team, the big team is 1996 and the beginning of the WNBA thereafter. But really, there is all this history, and you can argue that with Pat Summitt, it began there in terms of her participation. Can you just elaborate on that and telling that story? Because I think that's really interesting and something I think a lot of fans should know about.
You know, um, it's hard for us to imagine today, and for particularly for people who have grown up with basketball and women's basketball in particular being so popular. It's hard to imagine a time before that. And so I felt like it was really important to understand Pat. There are some coaches who like Dawn Staley, people know Dawn Staley's, Olympics, her, early time, like Liberty, like people know Dawn Staley's professional career and her career before. They don't necessarily know the story of a coach like Pat and a player Pat, person who played for the international teams, went to Russia. She grew up on a dairy farm in Tennessee. She was like, whoa, what is this? But it really stoked something in her. And I think it's something that it's not just the playing experience, although, she's on the first team that wins the Olympic silver medal, like there's a lot of history that went into the foundations of the W. And I remember when we were working on the 37 words and Billie Jean King was talking to us and Donna Deverona, and they were talking about how many times people tried to get a women's league started. I think it was something like 5 efforts, 4 times it failed until we get the W. So understanding a little bit of that history, I think it makes you appreciate even more what has happened. This meteoric rise of the W, like it's 50 years in the making. And so, the women have like this new contract. I'm so excited for them because, interviewing players like for 37 words for Power of the Dream, and now for Pat Summitt Story, I've seen like they're making $76,000 a year before this. This is crazy. This is why Brittany Griner is in Russia, you know? So
Exactly.
we'll see if people, probably still go abroad, but now they'll have a real option if they want to just take the season off and do something else, you know? So, but I think the core of your point is reminding people that people like Pat, you know, they kind of like laid the ground for the superstars of today, and they did it for the joy and love of the sport. You know, they weren't doing it for it wasn't the like machine that it is today. There's something kind of pure about when she was playing, that I think like really spoke to me.
So you think about the purity of the game, and I think at least in college, there's been just a lot of controversy in terms of that being lost with NIL, the transfer portal. There's a lot of change within college sports and how that transfers to the professional realm. Just interviewing the players and gathering your research. How do you kind of feel overall in terms of kind of the older generation
Yeah.
to the newer generation, in terms of just how, specifically women's college basketball is in terms of a lot of change. Certainly a lot of positives, but certainly I think some negatives too in terms of just a little bit of unregulation, in terms of what we're dealing with nowadays. So kind of how did you feel? Did that come up at all in terms of telling Pat Summitt Story in terms of contrasting, like you said before, the purity of the game compared to what's happening now?
I wouldn't say it came up overtly, but what I will say is that, there's a little bit of be careful what you wish for. Because as much as women and even just college kids with NIL are going to gain, there is something that's lost. And, hopefully we'll be able to do it better this time. Um, just even emotionally preparing kids, student athletes, for what this is going to be like. I think we have an opportunity. So, but at the same time, it's hard to be like, oh, okay, girls, you better not take advantage of all these things because it'll ruin you, when the boys and the guys have been doing it for forever. So I feel kind of, it's like a mixed thing. I will say when I go to Liberty games, the energy is different. The game is different. The feeling of being in the stands, there's so many more kids, there's so many more girls, there's so many more families. It does still have that kind of pure feeling. It doesn't feel like it's actual fans. It's not like people spending a lot of money for fancy seats. So, we'll see. I mean, I hope we've learned a lesson from, um, making so many things about money, but I guess we'll see, right?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah,
I
no,
hope
true.
so too. I know.
You mentioned with Pat Summitt in terms of her coaching style and preparing just her players for dealing with adversity throughout their lives. But when you're a player, I mean, she's very hard nosed, very strict. That may not go over well sometimes. How did the players kind of reflect on that in terms of just her coaching style, in the moment, and kind of reflecting on it and realizing that was,
Yeah.
beneficial to not only just their playing career but the rest of their lives as well. What were their opinions on his Pat Summitt's, coaching style overall,
Well,
looking back on it?
it's kind of like your parents, when you're sneaking out in high school and you're pissed or you're grounded. And then when you become a parent, you do the same things. Um, so I think Tamika Catchings said it so well. She's like, she did what she needed to do for us. And Coach Staley, Don Staley, said, when you got a tough coach, that's a love language. And I hope what the film does is it shows people not just the steely blue eyes, but the behind the scenes of the full relationship that she had with the players. Like, if she was mad, they knew she was right. I mean, that's the thing. They can look back on that now, but in the moment, you're hot, you're mad, you're benched, you're in trouble. And I think one of the things that I really respect about Pat is she would bench her best players. She was like, you know, there's footage in the film where she's like, "You don't do that, you're coming out." Like she did not hold back. I think that there's young people are more resilient than we think. And they know when people are giving them constructive feedback and being honest. I mean, would you rather have somebody say, "Oh, gold star," when you know you didn't earn it, or like reward you when you earn it and tell you you're out of your mind when you're, you know, being sometimey. So I think there was this respect for what she did, that pretty universally all of the players that universally all the players that we talked to said, I understand why she what she was doing. It made you want to play for her. Actually, it made you want to be better. And I think that a lot of parents could use that advice.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of coaches, like we see, you know, kind of people on there's kind of a famous like clip going around now of, you know, player being, you know, kind of yelled at and really given the business. That's part of it. These are elite athletes. They're intense. These relationships are intense. And so I think what the film helps to do is to give you a little more context for what that relationship is like. You know, she's tough on the court, and then they're all at her house all the time. They're dancing, they're making dinner, they're holding her baby. It's a full relationship, just like in our families it's a full relationship. And I think that we're so lucky that we had so much footage that we could show it. So it's one thing if people say, "Oh yeah, she was tough, but I loved her." It's another thing to see people, you know, like a Shamiqua Holdsclaw. It's another thing to see her, you know, crying into Pat's arms, um, or asking her for advice or help. So I think the film helps you understand, and then I think you appreciate even more the how much she gave to those players.
What surprised you in your interviews for this documentary? Anything that's, like, shocked you in terms of what they revealed about Pat Summitt that you
I
didn't know
think,
going into it?
yeah, I think the intensity of her and the just kind of consistency of her relationships with so many players. I think that one of the things I respected so much was she you can understand if people are paying a lot of attention to your superstars. She's paying a lot of attention to everybody. Um, and you know, we don't have this in the film, but Robin Roberts has, you know, in some of our interviews been telling a story of Robin went to Tennessee, to Knoxville as a baby cub reporter. She's 26 years old. She gets there. Pat Summitt's like, "Hey, who are you? How'd you know, a woman reporter in sports?" Pat loved it. And Robin's like, "She was interviewing me. You know, she wanted to know about my career," and they become good friends. And that just tells you so much about this woman. She was really looking for all of her players to see how she could help them, and how she could emphasize each of them individually, but also them coming together as a team. And you know, there's no I in team, right? So she's doing something that I think those are life lessons. And then the other thing that I did not know is 100% graduation rate. I mean, that is extraordinary. And I think that's why knowing your history is important. So when Pat went to school, there was no W to go to. There weren't like even scholarships at the beginning. So she's like, this ball's going to stop bouncing, but you're going to be whole people with degrees, and you're going to go off and do in your life whatever you're going to do.
Another thing in a documentary that really stood out to me was just her husband,
Mm.
and I believe he was, correct me if I'm wrong, a high position at a bank,
Yeah, he was
and
a CEO of a bank.
CEO. That's right. And just like him like supporting her, and just that was
The
unheard of.
flag.
That,
He's at the
yeah,
stands waving,
yes,
watching him
totally.
wait.
What was that like in terms of getting his perspective? Because I don't. That's the first time I've seen him just
Yeah,
on camera. So what was that
yeah.
like?
You know, RB was they were a real team. And, I hear so many women say, wow, I could really have a great career if I had a wife, and Pat had a wife. She had somebody who had regular hours, who was home, who brought their kid to all the games, who, there's some funny interviews we heard when Sally Jenkins, the reporter, says to Art, she's like, Arby, what's your role? And he's like, well, sometimes I drive the bus and sometimes, I'm just, but they just kind of, they just did it. A lot of people talk about how the family unit, they did it. And I think there was a real mutual respect. He met her after she was coming back from the Olympics and that silver medal. And so they met at a mutual friend's house, and all the guys, they wanted to see Pat's medal. So they kind of always had this orientation of like, she's the out there star. And he really was fine with that. And Tyler Summitt, their son, says, my dad was a unique kind of guy. He was perfectly fine with his wife being the more successful, kind of public person. And, they divorce. There's, I think that was a really unfortunate, um, kind of way that marriage ends. But I think it also says so much about him that he didn't hesitate. He didn't know what we were going to ask him about. He didn't limit any questions or anything like that. I'm kind of like, I'm not like a messy person. Like, I didn't feel the need to be like, tell me about your divorce,
Yeah.
and I think he was still to this day, like, it's clear the love of his life. And he was so proud of her and so amazed by what she accomplished. Um, and so, it was nice to be able to give him the opportunity to speak. I think he really brought something to the film.
Can you discuss for a younger audience that may not be aware of Pat Summitt's legacy within Tennessee, just how important she is to that university? Just because, with Tennessee has a very rich history in terms of other sports. And for a younger audience, like I grew up watching Pat Summitt, all the
Yeah,
time, but, I'm very familiar with college basketball. But for a lot of the audience now in 2026, they totally may not be aware of
yeah,
just Pat Summitt's legacy and just her connections to Tennessee and how much of a staple she is there. So can you
yeah.
just summarize that a little bit in terms of just how important she is specifically just to the University of Tennessee?
Yeah, yeah. So Pat Summitt goes to the University of Tennessee. And then she's 22 years old when first they ask her she's a graduate student. And first they asked her to be the assistant coach. And then the main coach quits. And they're like, scratch that. Can you just be the coach? So she, at 22 years old, when women's basketball was not the most popular thing. The program was not well resourced necessarily. And she takes over that team, and over her, multi-decade career, grows it into they become the dominant team in women's college hoops. Like, and then they have these major rivalries with Connecticut, with they're just like, Tennessee becomes synonymous with Pat Summitt, like the orange. I mean, and that goes both ways. So there is a statue of Pat Summitt in Knoxville. So like she is so integral to that program. And she loved the university. She spent her entire career there. She clearly could have done some other things. She spends her entire career there. She's so integral just to the fabric of the university. When Peyton Manning comes to the University of Tennessee to be the quarterback, um, the football coach invites Pat to come talk to the football team because he's like, she's the most inspirational leader we have.
Yeah.
And so Peyton Manning, like, he does a beautiful interview for us. They became friends. She mentors Peyton. There was some beer involved. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but there was some beer involved. Um, but when he's thinking about, should I go pro or stay at university, he talks it through with Pat. And she's one of the reasons he stays at Tennessee. You know, like, what a huge kind of influence she had. We have some really cool, there's a little bit of archive where she's got like the Tennessee ticker tape parade after, so 8 championships, back to back in 3 years back to back, innumerable Final Four appearances, 1,098 wins, the most of any coach, male or female, at the time that she was playing. And she sends 39 players to the WNBA. Like, her record is just, it's kind of like an unbelievable feat, the record that she attained in the short time that she was there. So, um, you just, it's kind of funny. I kind of joke, but I'm not joking, that when we went through the archive, when we talked to people, I was like, everybody really loves her. Dawn Staley says it. She's like, everybody loved her. And so I was like, I'm going to try and find some people who don't love Pat. And I couldn't find any. Like no, at least no one publicly is going to say anything. And I think that's because she just went about her business. She wasn't looking for fights, or she's competitive, but she just was like, I'm about me and my team. And we're going to focus on us and how good we can be. We don't need to trash talk other people. We're going to focus on us. Isn't that a lesson we would like to have today? Where people don't need to tear other people down. They can just focus on how can we be great, and doing it for the right reasons. So, she's one of the most inspirational, joyful people I ever have had and I've had some really great, like John Lewis. I mean, I've had some like great people that I've, been really, really privileged to be around. And even though she's not here, I feel like I know her. I feel like I just have such a sense of her insecurities, her humility, her desire to just help people. Not She's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. She lose her temper. But I don't know. I respect that. There's an intensity of feeling, as Don Staley says, a coach who's yelling at you, that has a real relationship with you, that's a love language. They're trying to figure out how to get you to be better.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you hear with other great coaches where they treat their star player the same way they treat, the 12th player on the bench, and that gets everybody to be unified in the common goal. So
Yes.
I think Pat Summitt totally completes that vision. Final question for you. For those who watch the documentary, what is one of the lasting impressions you want them to have just about uh, Pat Summitt's legacy and just her effect on women's basketball overall?
Yeah, I I want people to see how exciting these games were, and how just at the top of her game she was as a coach and as a mother. I what I really love is she has 7 miscarriages. She's and then until she gets her son. And then when he's born 3 weeks later, she's back in practice. And her nanny's bringing the baby to practice. And then he's on the bus and he grows up. So she didn't agonize about having it all. She's just like, I'm just going to bring the baby to work. And it was fine, and I think actually it helped her coaching to become a mother. So when people are like, will having a child, disrupt me? Maybe it'll make you better. So there's a lot of dimensions to this woman. Um, so much more off the court, that we can bring to her story, so we can appreciate her on the court achievements. And I think we can learn a lot from Pat Summitt and her legacy. And I'm really, really, really honored to be a person who's helping to tell that story. You know, it was a great ride working on this movie.
Well, it was great checking it out, and thank you for putting it together. Because I think I say this a lot when I interview authors or directors, but I think it's true that this is a film that I think all basketball fans should see. I think there's a lot of them, just in terms of getting just the history of the game, and this film belongs in that because it provides just a lot of context and tells a story of just probably one of the greatest just cultural figures we have, not only in just sports, but just overall in just in America in terms of just women's sports. So I appreciate you putting this together.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love being here. So thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Don, if you have any projects or social media you want our audience to be aware of, can you please share that?
Sure. So we have a film called When a Witness Recants. It's going to be on HBO. It's a wrongful incarceration story. So that's going to be out later this year. It's currently going to festivals. And then next year, we are doing the story of the SEC, all SEC championship between South Carolina and Mississippi State. And so have a great interview with Asia Wilson, um, also my goat, and which was really, really fun to do. I had to like put aside my love of Tennessee and then shift over to South Carolina. But Asia Wilson's telling her coming up story and what it was like to be on that team and to choose to go to South Carolina. I think people are really going to love it. The footage that the SEC has given us is dynamite. And to see when they beat Connecticut and like we have a universal, kind of rivalry with Connecticut from both Tennessee
Yeah.
and South Carolina. So look for that on ESPN and the SEC channel coming in 2027.
Awesome. Don, thank you very much for the time. Congratulations on the documentary. Truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, take care.